I just want to emphasize, because the speeches that were given was that the Trump tax reforms, which lowered the rate on corporations from whatever it was, 28 to 21 or whatever it was a bad thing, and they wanted to go in the other direction. But you're saying that that's a harebrained scheme. Hey, Larry, how you doing, man?
Glenn, great to be back with you.
Back on the Glenn Show. That's true. You've been on many times before. This is Glenn Loury. You've tuned into the Glenn Show. I'm here every other week with John McWhorter. And when I'm not here with John McWhorter, I'm here with a variety of people. And I'm now here with Professor Lawrence Kotlikoff, who is chaired professor of economics at Boston University, an old friend of mine. I've known him for decades. Larry is a very distinguished economist, and we're going to talk about economic policy. He's written many books. He's co-authored a book about Social Security, getting what's yours. He's actually engaged this massive question of demographic destiny in The Coming Generational Storm, which is a long time ago.
Yeah.
He's written about banking reform and finance and deleveraging with his limited purpose banking idea. His book is called Jimmy Stewart is Dead, which means the local banker is not coming to save you. He works on personal finance. Let me introduce you, Larry, because you've done all this stuff. You work on personal finance. You have a company that you are a founder of, MaxiFi Planner software that you are a developer of. You master computational techniques in these large-scale econometric models of global phenomenon. And, you're a player. You're a player in the economics game. I'm proud to call you my friend and to have you on the Glenn Show.
Well, I love you, and it's great to be back. And, actually, we just saw each other the other day hanging out for dinner here with a lovely house in Milan. And anyway.
That's because we both live in Providence.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm in, as it happens, Larry, this is the inaugural broadcast, and I'm recording from my home studio.
Oh, cool.
Which is a cubby hole down on the lower level with a desk and a couple of computer screens and some audio, video stuff, lighting and good microphone and whatnot that we have built so the Glenn Show can, and you could be here. We could be doing this live and in person is my point. So the Glenn Show can up its game a little bit in terms of production quality on the home side.
Well, that's great, because I'm in my basement. The picture my wife drew, actually painted. In the background. But anyway, I'll come over to your place next time.
His lovely wife, Bridget, who is an artist. So Larry ran for president. Was it 2016, Larry?
Yeah, actually, I tried in 2012. There was something called the Americans Elect. It was a platform. It was supposed to be a third-party platform. They were going to get registered in all the states. And they ran out of money. It went from like January through May. They said they ran out of money. I think they were a stalking horse for Bloomberg, frankly. And when Bloomberg decided not to run, they decided not to.
What was your connection to them?
Well, you can nominally, you could register to be a candidate, and then they were supposed to have a primary. So a bunch of us did that. And then the whole thing collapsed. So they just folded.
I'm taking it that your purpose in running, not that you anticipated to get elected, although you certainly hoped to, was to introduce policy ideas into the discussion at the presidential level.
Yeah. So in 2016, I ran again as a writing candidate, as a registered writing candidate. I thought that the press might take my candidacy seriously if I put together a serious platform. So I wrote a 100-page platform. And, each major policy, there was a solution to, whether it's healthcare reform, Social Security reform, banking reform, education reform, tax reform, welfare reform. They were all 10 bullets at most. So even though I say 100 pages, there are a lot of policies to look at, but the whole idea was to make it really simple and to describe not just what I think needs to be done, but what economics in general, what economists think as a group should be done. And I put that out there, and I tried to get the press interested, but they were just interested in the latest insult that Trump had hurled against some, so it was all surface discussion.
Okay.
And
so you're making that point about being drowned out by sensationalist news.
Right.
Causes me to ask the question of who cares what an economist thinks the policy should be? I mean, is there position that has not yet been argued for, which is that expertise should decide policy. I mean, is that axiomatic to you? I mean, do you think?
Absolutely, yeah, it's absolutely axiomatic that we have not a single PhD economist among 535 members of Congress, and so we're talking about kind of members of Congress with no engineering degree. Think about them designing the Verrazano Bridge or the George Washington Bridge. Maybe at a collapse, and they each put together their design for a section of the bridge. So that,
Society is like a bridge. Fixing unemployment or crime or single motherhood or drug addiction is like the engineering problem of getting a steel structure to stand.
well, I think economic policy, not necessarily drug enforcement issues. I mean, obviously, there's an
I
issue
just give
about
that as an example.
yeah. I mean, there are issues about
I'm saying technical issues of engineering is one thing. The delicate fabric of society, which is being influenced by policy, is another. And the question is what the standing of expertise is relative, for example, to charismatic leadership. You don't like Trump, but any leader is going to have a slogan. So if I can move people, maybe that's the thing that should be driving policy rather than the green eye shade calculation.
well, I mean, you can move people by saying when it comes to fixing, for example, Social Security, which is has an unfunded liability of $63 trillion, that we're going to fix it using putting together a panel of economists, not a panel of politicians, which is what happened last time. We're going to actually have a panel of expert economists. You don't have to say exactly what they're going to come up with, but one of the things would potentially be on that table would be my proposal, which is to shut down the current system and pay off
Shut it
everything,
down.
shut it down at the margin.
You mean new people coming of age not getting the same deal that I got?
Right. We have a system that's broke, that's 70, 88 years old, that's dysfunctional in so many ways, that's incredibly sexist. Let's pay off what we owe to current retirees, to current workers based on their earnings up till this point, their accrued benefits, give them that, but then have everybody contribute to a new system, which would be run on my laptop, frankly, that involves basically recreating in a modern way what the Singapore Providence Fund did for Singapore.
Don't go too far down into the weeds. I get kind of the idea. Is this privatizing?
No, it's not privatizing because all the money would be collectively invested. There would be government contributions on behalf of the poor, the unemployed, the disabled. So it would be progressive, probably more progressive than the current system. And it would be invested. The funds would be invested in a index of stocks and bonds and real estate funds that are, basically a weighted index, but run by my laptop. Nobody in Wall Street would get a penny, and then the government would provide a guarantee that you'll at least get back in real dollars what you put in adjusted for inflation.
Okay, not too far down into the weeds, but reforming Social Security. But how does that address my question? You say experts know, you being the expert in question, no. You kind of quasi-privatize, but you don't. But in any case, what you do is you vest it in the forward-going investment rather than in a kind of commitment to pay based on the demography.
Yeah, you move away from this Ponzi scheme we've been running, which is
Yeah.
take from young people, give to old people, tell the young people, don't worry, when you're old, you can expropriate your kids, and your kids can expropriate their kids. Well, there's not enough kids coming along earning enough money because productivity growth has slowed, wage growth has slowed to really meet these commitments. That's why we have $63 trillion of red ink in the system. That's 2 years of GDP.
Okay, so
That's 2 years.
again, not too far, 2 weeks, but I have a
I'm a weak guy.
I have a political argument that I want to make. You can't talk about Social Security without sticking your neck out onto a chopping block politically, where your self-interested political opponents will pillory you.
Not
You'll be caricatured, mischaracterized. Your motives will be questioned. Your whatever. Who has the credibility? And more importantly, where does that credibility come from? How does it get established? To be able
well.
to open up a very closed kind of discussion to the realities. I mean, it's really what you're talking about is the mythology of justifying the program versus the realities of sustaining it. And if you try to move out of the fantasy world into the real world, you get your head cut off and handed to you for it. So,
Not if you do it.
and where does the credibility, no, this is my point. Where does the credibility to change the conversation come from? That's not an expertise question. That's touching people. It's moving them. It's getting them to believe in you. It's the narrative. It's a more of a theatrical than it is an engineering enterprise.
Well, we had, I'd say part of the expertise, or maybe the precedent, let's put it that way, not the expertise. The precedent for this type of reform is right in front of us in terms of what happened to corporate America's defined benefit pension programs. If you go back in time, go back to 1980, almost every major U.S. corporation had a defined benefit pension plan, not unlike Social Security. And almost all of them did exactly what I'm saying, which is shut down their old system, pay off their accrued liabilities, set up something new, which was a defined contributions system. And did it treat their existing workers all fairly? No. And I was the only person to actually write about how they screwed over certain. IBM was the first company to do this. And I wrote an article for the Boston Globe called The Great Pension Swindle. So I'm talking about a transition here, paying off what we owe, and then producing something modern that we'll be able to compare the treatment of, let's say, a 30-year-old under the old system with a 30-year-old under the new, that same person under the new system. So I'm talking about something that's done carefully, set up carefully in a way that does not make anybody dramatically worse off compared to the current system. But we're in a hole to begin with. So there has to be some pain that's spread across everybody. We can't get out from $63 trillion unfunded liability.
Okay. I just want to quickly ask you, how do you deal with one of the counter proposals that I've heard, which is to raise the cap on the FICA tax, which we pay into Social Security from whatever income level it is now. You will know, and I don't, 180,000 or something like that, right, to bring people like you and me to the chopping block in terms of tax liability. What's wrong with that?
Well, the problem is the incentive to work. We already have the median tax rate for the top 20% of earners is roughly around 56%. If you go to Kotlikoff.net, there's an article about marginal taxation of Americans' labor supply that you can read. We calculated this. And it's not just the top earners. It's the poor in particular are facing very high marginal tax rates. We're locking the poor into poverty. So across the board, we are a very high tax country at the margin. We're giving people very bad incentives to work and to save. So we have to realize that reform of just raising taxes is going to lead high earning people to leave the country. And that's going to mean, there'll be economic fallout from that, because we need those people to help make everybody else productive. And those other people less skilled people have to be here to make high skilled people productive. We're working together. So we can't lock anybody out of the workforce. So any proposal for reform, we can't reform things piecemeal. We can't fix Social Security by itself, taxes by themselves, healthcare by itself. We have to have a comprehensive plan to fix all these institutions so that we can get everybody's marginal tax rate down to 30%. Everybody's across the board. And that's what I'm proposing in my platform back in 2016. If you read Your Hire, that's a book that's for free on my website at Kotlikoff.net. It lays out exactly this platform, because I took the platform, made it into a book. And
okay, let's talk about the tax thing. Let me see if I'm understanding you. So a person works, they get paid $1, but the tax takes 30 cents out of it. Their real net return from working is 70 cents. That's their incentive to work. If The higher the tax rate, the less the incentive, the less the work, the less productive, dynamic, efficient is the economy. We have a hodgepodge of programs that they've sprouted like weeds in the garden. They have different provisions and different conditions. When you net those things out, the consequences of that programmatic forest that people have to manage their way through is implicitly to create taxes for them. And you want to find ways of doing the same thing that those programs are doing, but doing it in a way that doesn't discourage them from producing and working and saving and investing.
Yeah, we have about 500 fiscal programs in our country. If you can think about it, every state has their own Medicaid program. Every state has their own, 33 states have their own earned income tax credit on top of the federal income taxes earned income tax credit. We have food stamp programs that have different provisions by state. So that's how you get to 500. And if the whole system was built without anybody thinking about what is this extra program that we're adding that I'm going to go advertise back to my constituents, doing to people's overall incentives to work. No calculations of any kind, no consideration by these politicians. That's why they're not qualified to make reforms, because they're not trained to make reforms. They're not thinking about things right. Now, I just want to point out one thing. I'm going to sound like a supply sider here. And
you are a supply side.
Okay, well, yeah, but for many years, until I really have done, in the last couple of years, really done more clear, extensive work and careful work on these 500 programs and how they work together, I thought, if you raise taxes, people have an incentive not to work, but they also, are going to lose some income. So therefore, they will want to work more to make up the loss of income. That's the substitution and the income effect in our language, as economics, right? And I thought pretty much, and the literature suggested, given the preferences or the behavior of people, that these things kind of offset. But there's another major factor here that I left out of my thinking that is huge, which is that even if you go from a 30% smooth, linear tax to a 40% tax, that might not change your labor supply. But if you tell somebody, hey, if you reduce your labor supply, you won't lose your Medicaid. If you reduce your labor supply, your marginal tax rate will be lower. Now you've got an extra incentive in this nonlinear fiscal system we have, net tax system, to reduce work. And that extra incentive is enormous. So the old story about income effects and offsetting labor supply substitution effects really doesn't hold in our 500 plus fiscal policy mess that we have.
So people who are not economists are not going to understand this, but I'm going to try to explain it anyway. So people are maximizing. They have indifference curves and budget constraints. Okay. And the budget constraint is a line that is sloped one way or the other depending on the tax rate. And the typical analysis causes the tax rate to change and the budget line rotates, and then it looks at how people's behavior changes. And Larry is saying, if that's all that's going on, the net effect of that will be roughly zero at the margin, given where we are for small changes in the tax rate. However, it's not only that the change in the policy causes the line to rotate, it's that it changes the net tax effect of the whole programmatic structure. And it amplifies it. A little change in the tax rate causes a bigger change in the line.
It's not really a line, it's a curve, and it's a very jagged curve, if you like. So it's our picture of a straight line budget constraint rotating is not at all correct. It's, if the simplest version would be, we have a progressive system that's giving you a frontier, a trade-off that's curved. And now you have an incentive to work less in order to lower your marginal tax rate. And here we are giving people that incentive in spades, because it's not just to lower your marginal tax rate and get into a lower tax bracket. It's also to make sure you don't lose your Section 8 housing if you're a low income, low wage worker, your Medicaid, your Obamacare subsidies in certain states. You could be tossed off of the Obamacare program if you actually earn too little money. and you will not be able to get onto Medicaid because you're in this gap in between the Medicaid and the Obamacare programs in like 18 states. So it is bizarre. It is crazy. We have simulated using new technology, breakthrough methodology, how exactly people would respond to even a simplified version of our craziness. And you see for behavior, which would not otherwise, labor supply that would not otherwise change in a kind of just a linear tax system, you see enormous changes in behavior, a simplified version of what we've got. And now we're studying more carefully the entire, all 500 programs and what
Okay.
their total effect is.
Let's talk about something else.
Okay.
What do you want to do about healthcare? And by the way, what we're doing, isn't it, is sketching what the Harris campaign's policy agenda should look like.
Yeah, or the Trump agenda as well. I mean, I'm not, being partisan here, and neither of them are advancing, anything important in terms of policy reforms. And most of their proposals are first order stupid. Putting on a tariff. I mean, that's Trump's proposal. 10% tariff. It's just going to raise prices 10%. It's going to lower our living standard across the board.
Yeah, I agree. It's terrible.
It's just stupid. There's one thing, not taxing.
Well, it's like a national sales tax, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's worse because it's distorting the choice between imports and imported goods and domestically produced goods. We're not producing shoes anymore. We're not producing watches anymore. We're not producing a whole lot of things. And, it's just going to make the price of those things higher. And it's going to lead us to not consume these goods and consume more of those goods and make us have a worse bundle of what we purchase and make us worse.
Well, it's an anti-liberal, anti-market idea. How is it that the party of the business community is infected with this with this disease?
Well, you have, I have to just say economic morons on both sides. Nobody's been trained in economics formally, so they haven't.
Doesn't someone need to give a speech, excuse me for interrupting, in which they say, trade is not our enemy, trade is our friend, and really stand for that?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to give that speech right this minute in your show.
Go ahead.
Unless we have some leverage, it's one thing to say, look, we're going to put on this tariff, and because of that, China is going to reduce the price at which they sell stuff to us so that we're basically going to end up better off. We're going to get to buy the same thing. They're going to end up worse off. We're going to end up, it's kind of beggar thy neighbor, but we'll succeed in that. There's no reason to believe that's the case. We don't have that kind of market power over China, let alone the entire world, by putting tariffs on. We're at most 25% of world GDP, and we're actually, in that context, a small open economy, not a large dominating economy. So in that context, putting on tariffs is just shooting ourselves in the head. If you had across the board sales tax, then you'd be taxing all goods, no matter where they're coming from, where they're being produced. But to make things that we can't produce very efficiently and cheaply, much more expensive, and then
the jobs have gone to China. The jobs have gone overseas. I mean, so you have a town that's dried up and failing, and the storefronts are closing, and people are unemployed, and there's opioid addiction, and there's, they're depressed because the winds have blown against them. And you also have prosperity. On the other side of the globe, you have people getting rich. You have cities springing up, and you have a bounty. And the idea is irresistible that their success is coming at our expense, that they're taking something from us. That's a mistake. That's a false idea. It's a false understanding of the way the world actually works. Their prosperity is your friend. It's not your enemy. It's not a zero-sum game.
No, I mean, the fact that we can buy clothes that are made in Vietnam or Sri Lanka or China, used to be China, but more these other countries, at much lower cost. Imagine we couldn't import any clothes. The price of clothes would probably be twice as high, or furniture. There's all kinds of things that we're not making here, and the chair I'm sitting on, the desk have my laptop on, all that stuff would probably be twice as expensive if we were not able to import it. And the other countries will retaliate. And so we'll have a trade war. We'll go back to the 30s where everybody has super high tariffs and everybody's worse off. So if Trump wants to be an isolationist, he should lock himself up in the Trump Tower.
Yeah, but this is not about Trump. I agree with you that this is a bad policy. But what I want to ask is this belief. I'm going to bring manufacturing jobs back to America. I'm going to bring high-paying union jobs back. They're not making this or that anymore in our country. We need to do something about that. That's not just Trump. That's an idea that infects our whole political discourse. And it does seem to be against everything we have been taught in our teaching as economists.
We've gone from 25% of the workforce at most in manufacturing down to about 8% today. That was like post-war, maybe before the war, it was around 25%, 25%. We're down to 8%. We're going to direct our entire economic policy on the basis of 8% of the workforce just to try and help them. Why don't we just tax everybody else and give them some more money if we care about manufacturing workers? Or why don't we tax everybody else and give it to waitresses and waiters if we care about people earning tips? I mean, this is just so stupid.
What about the minimum wage? I mean, there's a lot of this. There's enough to go around.
The minimum wage is another, it's really getting poor people to help other poor people, because basically you raise the minimum wage. Some poor people lose their job. Low-wage workers lose their job. They live together with other wage workers. The ones who keep their job get a higher salary. And so the family is going to be sharing the money, but it's not taking from high-wage people and giving to low-wage people. It's just taking from low-wage people and giving to other low-wage people. I mean, the redistribution is going to happen within the family. And
encouraging employers to substitute away from low-wage labor.
Yeah, go get some robots, get some smart machines, get some, automate. And we have to get around that. I mean, one of my policies in my book, You're Hired, is education. Think about doing the following. We can videotape every course from K through 12th grade, every class, whether it's 8th grade algebra or 10th grade trigonometry, have it taught by 10 of the best teachers in the country, videotape all those, provide them online on the Department of Education's website. You go there, you see nothing. Okay. And then everybody in the country, every school system can pull those online courses and they can get headsets for their kids and let the kids spend a third of the day, half the day, whatever the teacher thinks is best. Maybe it could be zero part of the day, watching the best teachers in the country deliver the best curriculum.
Good luck with that program. You got to get past the National Education Association with that program. Good luck with that.
It's voluntary, Glenn. You're not forcing it on anybody. It's just there. And any parent over the weekend or at night on the weekdays can pull that. It's just not there. That costs nothing. That could be done tomorrow. That just makes common sense. In Cuba, they put all the kids in each grade in front of a TV. Every high school kid, every elementary school kid, middle school kid, they're all sitting in front of a TV for part of the day, seeing the exact same education throughout the country. And they're much better educated than one would think in a communist country. Now, the whole economy is in terrible shape because
they probably have better health care too than you might think.
Yeah, but they have better education than you'd think. Yes.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it for years. It's a TV.
I want to continue with what economists know that the politicians seem to willfully ignore, and what the demagoguery of political discourse overlooks when you put on a good green eye shade and you know what you're talking about. What about billionaires and corporations? I listened to the rhetoric at the Democratic National Convention, and they want to go after the billionaires, the millionaires and billionaires, the rich people who are not paying their fair share. Do you know what Warren Buffett's secretary pays? Do you know, et cetera, et cetera? What about the fallacy of that? And what about the idea that rich corporations, so we're going to tax rich corporations in order to get them to pay their fair share, when in fact, the incidence of the corporate income tax is a very complicated product, and you live in an international, a global economic system, et cetera. What about that?
Okay, so let me break this into two pieces. First of all, on the billionaires, we have the way the tax system is set up, billionaires can pay essentially zero. Okay, all they have to do is they have assets which they have in basically stocks or other securities that are not paying out income, and they just let those assets appreciate. And since they're not realizing any capital gains, they're not paying any taxes on it. Meanwhile, they're borrowing money for all their consumption, and they're borrowing at a low rate. So through time, they're paying no taxes, basically. I think we need to be changing the entire tax structure, get rid of, think about this. Suppose we move to a progressive cash flow consumption tax where we tax everybody's consumption, including billionaires' consumption, on a global basis so that and we would impute rent, we would impute the consumption value of your yacht, your Learjet.
What do you mean tax on the, excuse me for interrupting, I just want to understand. What do you mean tax on a global basis? You mean the countries coordinate their taxes?
No, we would have people, report their consumption if they have, and their assets. If they have a yacht parked in Majorca, okay, they would have to report it. We would impute a consumption value to it. That would be part of the tax base for determining their consumption tax. We would tax.
Okay, so we're getting rid of the income tax system.
And the corporate income tax, because the corporate income tax, to get back to that, it's surely a tax on workers. When the Democrats claim that corporations need to be taxed more, what they're talking about is taxing American workers at a higher rate. Now, it seems like if you tax corporations, you're taxing the owners of corporations, but those corporations can get up and move their capital abroad. And what they do is they leave behind their workers, and their workers have less capital to work with, and therefore their wages fall. So the ultimate incidence, the ultimate burden is falling on the workers. Most economists believe this is the case, that the corporate tax is actually a hidden tax on workers. And I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I ran against both of those parties twice, okay? At great personal, not great personal financial expense, but some expense in terms of my family and friends thinking I was lunatic, crazy. Okay. Now many of them are saying, I wish you were running today.
Fat
So
chance.
I have a lot of people saying that these days.
Yeah, but you weren't going to win. That was my previous point about expertise is not what's driving the show here. But go ahead. Go ahead. I want to hear about the incidence of the corporate income tax.
So I do think we should get rid of it. And or at least we should just set it at the minimum level that Treasury Secretary Yellen has set, which is 15%. And be the most.
I just want to emphasize, because the speeches that were given was that the Trump tax reforms, which lowered the rate on corporations from whatever it was, 28 to 21 or whatever it was a bad thing, and they wanted to go in the other direction. But you're saying that that's a harebrained scheme.
That itself is harebrained, but what I'm talking about is getting rid of the corporate tax, the federal income tax, and replacing and making the FICA tax more progressive, and then having a highly progressive personal consumption tax that ensures that the billionaires pay taxes on their consumption, which is what we really care about. Warren Buffett, we don't really want to be taxing Warren Buffett because he's rich. We want to tax Warren Buffett if he's spending a lot of his money, because if he's not, he's leaving it to somebody. He's going to actually leave his money to his 5 kids. And I think it's 5 kids.
I think he said he was going to put it in a foundation, didn't he?
Well, he decided not to give it to the Gates Foundation.
But the understanding is the kids would create some other kind of philanthropy.
Their own funds, which they're going to give to the public. So I think if the kids spend the money on themselves, hey,
they should be
taxed. But if they're spending on you and poor people and healthcare, or helping people in Africa drill wells or get mosquito nets, God bless them. They're probably doing
one of the things about a consumption tax is basic. It's going to encourage savings, isn't it?
Yeah, and our country is saving 3% of national income. We used to, in the 50s, we were saving and the 60s, 13% of national income. If you look at the data, which I've been calculating for decades now, the national saving rate has gone from there down, had a few wiggles, but basically it's a straight line downhill. The domestic investment rate has gone from about the same 13, 14% down to about 4% of GDP, national income. So we're doing exactly what's happening is exactly what economic theory says should happen if you run the policies we've been running. And part of those policies are taking from young savers and giving to old spenders. That's one of the major reasons we're saving so little. And also, incentives to save are important here too. And but the main thing is the redistribution through a whole lot of different programs for decades. We've changed the tax structure to put more of the burden on young people. We've expanded these important social insurance programs, but we've done it in a way where, in the process, we've taken from the young and given to the old. We finance them as Ponzi schemes. We've set up, program after program to help the poor, and each one of them is helping to lock the poor into poverty. So we need to rethink our entire welfare system and in a way that doesn't disincentivize people to work. I mean, here's an example. Suppose you think about food stamps. If you earn an extra dollar food stamps, you lose, I think, 20 cents on the dollar in, if you work and earn an extra $1,000, you're going to lose $200 in food stamps, is my understanding. Now, what if we did it differently? What if we said we're going to have federal government distribute food and give food in schools and low-income neighborhoods? There'll be distribution of food in low-income neighborhoods, and there'll be free breakfast, lunch, and dinner in schools and also on weekends for the residents of low-income neighborhoods. Now, do you think a rich person from, let's say, the Back Bay in Boston is going to go to Roxbury to go get a free? They're not. So it's not going to disincentivize work. That's the way you can.
No, I like the idea. I mean, it's really very clever, and I just want to highlight something I think that's going there. You're leveraging the shame. The thing is, there's this incentive problem. If you want to have a benefit or a tax, you're going to distort, and that's going to have a dead weight loss associated with it. It's going to have an incentive cost to it, and you want to minimize that. So you want to target the food aid, and rather than having it be a grant to people based on their income, having it be an in-kind provision, and you don't worry about the exploitation of the in-kind by the people who don't need it because you have the shame. You have the shame cost going with it, which is a very clever way of taking a social thing. Just let me make the point, Larry. Because we're economists talking about incentives and margins and prices, but we're using society. We're using judgment of other people about who's a good person and whatnot, and to accomplish our economic goal. And I think there's a lot of stuff like that. For example, suppose we were talking about unwed pregnancy. Suppose we were talking about early childhood pregnancy. The shame of being a person with a baby born out of wedlock might be a useful instrument in encouraging, or I should say discouraging, the behavior. What about criminal behavior? What about youth detention centers and things of this kind? I just want to make the point that there's something interesting here for socio-economic analysis.
Right. And all this comes from George Akerlof, the Nobel Prize winner.
Tagging?
Tagging. This is tagging. So everything I have in this book, in this platform, or large parts of it, are not just from me. They're the collective ideas and views of economists. So in health economics, in health reform, I've talked to a whole lot of health economists, basically everybody in health economics, and also George Halverson, the former head of Kaiser Permanente. I spent a lot of time trying to think about how we should fix our healthcare system. And the modern version of this is called the Better Care Plan, which is a joint proposal with George Halverson and some other leading health economists. I'm not a leading health economist. I'm just, I work on this stuff. I did write a book called The Healthcare Fix. Basically, I had the same proposal. So everybody, talk to all these top health economists. They say, hey, we need a competitive, functional version of what looks close to Medicare Part C. We need Medicare for all, but the Republican version. The Republican version is called the Advantage Plan, Medicare Part C. That's competitive provision of health care so that we can get our healthcare spending down from 18% of GDP down to 15%, sorry, to about 11%, and get our quality of healthcare from like 25% or the 25th ranking to the 4th ranking. That's the Swedish numbers.
This sounds like magic. This sounds like magic. How are you going to do this?
All the other major industrial countries have this type of system where you have healthcare systems competing, where the government's paying a voucher for your healthcare, and then at the margin, the insurance company that you sign up with is responsible. So they have an incentive to be efficient, but they also know that you can walk the next year to a different system. So then you have an incentive to also give you the best care for the given amount of money they're getting from the government. So that's what's working in Israel and France. Sweden is spending 11% of GDP, and it's ranked 4th in terms of quality of healthcare. We're spending.
If the government is providing the funds, why do I need the insurance company?
The insurance companies are innovative. They're providing the health insurance. The government is paying a
why not just have the government pay the provider?
Well, that's the national healthcare system of England. That's That's traditional Medicare. That's, in my view, much less efficient. There's going to be less the competition. We know that competition helps. We've had lots of history, lots of experience. Look at the Soviet Union versus the West. Lack of competition is a terrible. It's just not going to work.
I'm missing something. How is it that the single payer, the government paying the provider, precludes competition amongst providers for the benefit of getting paid by the government by providing the services to? People can still choose their provider, but the government pays. What am I missing?
Well, the government would pay a voucher to your insurance company you choose, and it would be based on your pre-existing condition. It'd be an experience rated or a healthcare related voucher, determined voucher.
So why do I need the insurance company? I'm sorry, I'm being dense. I apologize. Why do I need the insurance company? What are they providing?
They're providing, they get a certain amount of money for you. They're supposed to take care of you over the year. Now they have to decide what's the most efficient way to do that. Should we have electronic medical record system that's really up to date? It connects with other institutions that we might need to send you to. Should we have team care to take care of you? Should we make sure that we're giving you the right medication? Should we, send you to PT after this operation for 6 days versus 3 days? That's what I mean by all these micro decisions that somebody in Washington cannot make per person in real time to provide you the best for a given amount of money. So this is happening in part of Medicare already. We have about half of new Medicare beneficiaries enrolling in Medicare Part C, the Advantage Plan. So they're not crazy. They realize that they can get very good health care and at a more affordable price than being in traditional Medicare, where they have to pay for a supplemental policy and pay more for drug benefits. So they go to this other system. Now, the problem is having both systems at once. We actually have a very balkanized system. We've got traditional Medicare, Medicare Advantage. We have Obamacare. We have employer-provided health care, and we have Medicaid. Let's have one system where where everybody gets a voucher based on their pre-existing conditions, and you get to spend it on whichever health company you want. And those health providers care providers would have to provide care no matter where you lived. So they could not cherry pick and locate in a healthy neighborhood and avoid abandon. And that's what's happened under Obamacare. If you go to Dallas, for example, there used to be a number of providers throughout the Dallas metropolitan area. And now there's just 2 hospitals that take Obamacare patients, and they're in the lowest income neighborhoods, and they're miles away from a lot of people who need to get there.
Okay, that
So,
sounds like an important point. But our time is limited, and I want to ask you about some other stuff that we talk about economic policy.
okay.
So famously, the Harris campaign announced a anti-inflation policy that was going to focus on price gouging, and again, bad corporations who were exploiting supply chain situation in order to unfairly raise their prices at supermarkets and whatnot like that. I'm not asking you to comment on that proposal. I'm saying, what do you, in your expert wisdom, view as the solution to the inflation problem?
Let me just say, I think that was, it's ridiculous to start blaming some part of the economy for high prices unless you have evidence to produce that they're monopolizing supply. So to start with, that's crazy. What the inflation clearly was due to supply side bottlenecks. I don't think it was demand driven, or it might have been that the Biden administration and the Trump administrations went overboard in trying to save the country from COVID and save the
Well, there's no
economy.
doubt about that, is there?
Is there no?
that
Well,
that we overshot in terms of flooding the country with money and running big deficits in order to hold people harmless against the economic consequences
it's
of a
it's
lockdown.
it's not at all 100% clear because prices are being set by 35 million people in businesses, small businesses across the country. We've had major increases in the deficit and the debt over time in the money supply, and we haven't seen price increases. And then all of a sudden they spike up. I think it's more likely that it was these supply chain
Okay.
bottlenecks. Tell you the truth, and I think she should have just said, "Look, it's happened here. It happened in other countries. COVID's over. The economy's getting back together, and we need now to make sure that what I would have said was that employers need to realize that workers have to catch up with respect to their real wage. So for a while here, we're going to see wages, nominal wages, growing faster than prices. That's the way it's supposed to work. So if you see wages going up, don't raise your prices necessarily beyond 2% because that's what we're all trying to get on board with. 2%. I would use some jawboning. You're trying to convince 35 million people who are setting prices on their own to do something to collectively. Well, for God's sakes, tell them what to do. If you're Jerome Powell, get up there and tell them what you're trying to do. Don't just talk about setting the stupid interest rate, which nobody, if you look at the history of Federal Reserve changes of interest rates and the connection of that to inflation or to employment or unemployment, it's very tough to see any connection. So we have like an emperor's new clothes here, where the Fed and the entire kind of Fed follower industry thinks the Fed actually can do something immediate to the economy. Well, it may be going to affect the stock market for a bit, but the Fed has been, what we need to do is be talking to all these people that are setting prices. Now, it's not Jerome Powell, it's not the
Why
president,
should they listen to you?
because if they get their prices out of line they could set their prices too high compared to other competitors. They could set them too low. I think it's very important for them to know where, to have some direction for how to price so that we can get everybody on the same page. And Kennedy did this in the steel strike. The case of steel companies wanting to raise prices by 3% back when he took office in 1960, and he went on the tube and said, "This, this won't stand." He talked them down. They
He
dropped their
bluffed, in
prices.
other words, because the courts
What?
wouldn't have. He bluffed.
Yeah, he bluffed, but they responded, and that kept inflation low for a while. And then the lid came off under
Well,
Vietnam.
what I remember from the 70s is whip inflation now. People with the win buttons. This was Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, and I thought that was a fiasco.
That was a fiasco. Then Carter comes along and puts on price controls on gas because of the OPEC raised the prices. That was another fiasco.
Why isn't this like trying to get people to turn their thermostats down by putting on a cardigan sweater and sitting in front of a fireplace when you give a national speech? I mean, I almost want to break out in laughter.
Well, it's too sad to laugh over. I mean, It's
Well,
really
I mean,
just
isn't the right analysis that we have a coordination problem, that everybody's price is somebody else's cost, and people don't want to lose money. So when they think their costs are going to go up, they raise their price. And it's an equilibrium for everybody to want to raise their price and thinking that others are going to raise their price and so on. And you're trying to get them to reduce their anticipation of what is going to happen for their costs when the other guy raises his price by announcing to everybody, we're only going to go up by 2%. But I'm not, I need a model to be persuaded that the announcement effect is going to actually have a real effect on the equilibrium, Larry.
well, we're going to write that paper. I may be wrong. It might, I might be, it might show that, the equations might not prove what I'm saying or suggest what I'm saying, but pretending that the Fed is all powerful, or that this particular increase in the deficit, we have, the Social Security unfunded liability in recent years has gone up $10 trillion from one year to the next.
Oh my God.
Nobody's looking at that. Yes, nobody's looking at that, and they're saying, okay, well, this official deficit is causing inflation, but this unofficial deficit, which we're actually going to have to pay for sure, and that deficit is indexed to inflation, whereas the other one can be wiped out with inflation. And we've wiped out 20% of our official debt by running inflation in recent years. So this inflation was actually very fiscally conservative in many ways, because we wiped out people's holding of treasuries.
This is such a subtle point. So there's different kinds of debt obligation. So the programs that you're running, like Social Security, where you make promises that you're going to keep, you're not going to not send their people that money,
right,
is one kind of obligation. And then the financial thing, where you're trying to raise enough revenue to cover your expenditures, and your revenues are short, so you have to borrow from foreigners and your own people in order to cover the difference, is another kind of deficit. And the former, the programmatic induced deficit, is not eroded by the inflationary consequences of borrowing beyond your revenues, because it's tied to inflation and the programs are indexed. Whereas the other kind, your Chinese bondholders can be implicitly taxed, because the dollars you're going to pay them back with are going to be worth less than the dollars that they paid you when you borrowed the money in the first. Anyway, just thought I would explicate on that.
right.
What about the deficit, Larry? The fact that interest on the outstanding federal national debt exceeds the defense budget in some people's calculations. That's over $1 trillion a year.
Yeah, so we have a huge long-term fiscal problem. Our fiscal policy is unsustainable. Our country is fiscally bankrupt. And it's not just Social Security, it's the entire enterprise. So we need to do long-term fiscal accounting, and also talk about generational accounting, which says, look, if here's the, how much extra money today we would need in order to cover all the outlays for the entire country that we don't have, and therefore we have to raise taxes. And the longer we wait to do that, the more it's going to fall on our kids. That kind of analysis needs to be done, because we kind of have to stop the static focus on the books liabilities, the official debt that's on the books, and we're putting all the other debts off the books and not looking at them, and they're getting huge. And now we're starting to see them through trustees' reports. So part of this a new administration needs to do long-term fiscal accounting and set policy that way, change the tax and benefit system, so we get more revenue, better incentives to work. We can do it. The good news is that we've made such a mess that fixing it in a rational way can make us all better off, and get our economy to the point where we can actually spend 5% of GDP on defense. We're spending, I think it's the lowest post-war share, below 3%, that we've had since World War II, the lowest share, and we have the biggest threats. I mean, it's ridiculous. If we're going to try and face off against China, Russia, and Iran, and we're spending less as a share of GDP on defense, come on.
Okay, well, that's not economic expertise. That's international policy and defense expertise. Right. But I want to note, nowhere in your account of the fiscal calamity that we're wandering into, did I hear balance the budget?
I'm talking about balancing the intertemporal budget, not balancing some phony static budget, okay? Based on, I mean, the problem runs really deeper than our ability to put debts off the books versus on the books is really a function of what we call things. If I take money from you and I say I'm going to pay it back, I could say it's borrowing and future repayment of principal plus interest, or I can say it's a tax and a future transfer payment. The first set of words, it's off the books. The second set of words, it's on the books. So this kind of deficit-based accounting is not balancing anything. It's a word game. What we need to do is fiscal gap accounting. Look at all the outlays, all the revenues. Don't call them one thing or another. Just what's being going out the window as projected, what's coming in as projected. That's the difference. That's what we have to make up by either reforming policy and getting, more coming in and less going out, because we're and getting, better results for people in terms of they're working more, earning more on their own, and less inequality. I'm not talking about trying to penalize anybody. I'm trying to help people. And we can't do it the way we're going. We have to look at a long-term fiscal budget and balance that.
That's Larry Kotlikoff, the economist. He's got a plan. Actually, he's got a half dozen plans. And he advises both Democrats and Republicans to take him seriously for the sake of the country. My friend Larry Kotlikoff, thanks for being a guest on The Glenn Show.
Hey, my pleasure, Glenn. Anytime.